All right. Well, welcome everyone to the first Elevate Educational Summit. Today we'll be speaking about four big secrets business owners keep from themselves that sabotage the M&A process. Our guest today is Dr. David Gruder, and Dr. David Gruder is a musician. He's an author. He's a 12-time award-winning clinical and organizational psychologist. And if there's a group looking at leadership and psychology, believe facilitating or heading up that organization. So we only have 30 minutes, and in the interest of time, that's about as much as I can do for an introduction. But Dr. Gruder, welcome to the webinar, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Jason. And the only thing that I would amend from your introduction is that I'm a recovering musician.
Well, good luck on that recovery path.
I don't think I'll ever recover from it.
Fair enough.
Love it too much.
There are worse afflictions to have.
I agree.
So with that, we're going to kick off the conversation, and I'll be asking a few questions and opening the floor for Dr. Gruder to provide us with his insight. And we hope that you all enjoy and find some valuable information in this. So, Dr. Gruder, first thing that we'd like to discuss is, what are the most common psychological factors, inflate opinions about what their businesses are truly worth?
Well, let me have you ask that question again because part of your question disappeared in the ethers. So would you word it again?
Sorry about that. So most business owners seem to have an inflated opinion about the actual transactional value of their business. What are the psychological factors at play in this opinion?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, that's a great place to start. I think it's important in understanding what business owners go through that kind of inflates their opinions and things like that is that they're kind of like biased parents. They love the business generally that they've built, and they've got a huge investment in seeing the business succeed, just like devoted parents do. And because of that kind of parental bias, they often believe that their business is more unique than it is. And they also think it's worth more than it is because in oftentimes it's basically wishful thinking, if you will, about their financial future. They have financial goals they want to reach, and it's perfectly human to hope and believe that we're closer to reaching those goals than we might actually be. And then the last part is that oftentimes business owners wrap their self-worth up in their business to more of an extent than is good for them. And one of the side effects of that is that it's hard for business owners to see their business in an objective way.
I can completely appreciate that. If only we could do ego-based valuations in the marketplace, right?
Right, right.
So with that said, and I believe that most of the people on this call are going to be either business owners or trusted advisors. When it comes time to have that conversation and tell a business owner, yes, your baby's beautiful, but it's not Miss America. What are the psychological factors that need to be accounted for in having that conversation in a way that's going to be, meaningful, positive, and constructive for the business owner?
Mm, mm. Well, the first thing is kind of piggybacking on what I was saying earlier. The extent to which their self-worth and their identity are dependent on their business. That's one factor that we need to account for, because when someone is really wrapped up in their sense of self, has wrapped their sense of self and their business together, they're going to be a little touchier about input that they might get. And uh, Another touchy piece is the Peter Principle. And for those of our viewers who aren't familiar with the Peter Principle, what it says is that people are promoted to their highest level of incompetence. Well, the same thing is true with self promoting ourselves into owning a business, into being entrepreneurs. The the boldness and the courage and the audacity that is required to build a business, which is absolutely wonderful stuff, uh, inevitably causes us to be stepping into situations that require more skills than we came into our own business already having. And there's there's what I call Peter Principle guilt, where we've got owners who either consciously or unconsciously are feeling guilty that their um, competence as a business leader, as the owner of the business, as the CEO, as the president, as whatever they're calling themselves, is not really fully up to speed compared to who they need to become in order for their business to fully succeed. So I call that Peter Principle guilt. The third thing that I think we need to account for is connected to what I said earlier too, which is that oftentimes business owners' financial goals are such that that they are high enough that they have fears that they might not reach them, and that financial fear needs to be accounted for and dealt with as well when it's present. And I think that, also building on what I said earlier, it's very important that we bear in mind that for many owners, their business is their child. And one thing that I think is important for those of us who work with business owners is for us to think about how we would want to get feedback about our child's problems or our parenting challenges, and to offer business owners that same level of respect and compassion and empathy. And I don't mean holding back and not saying what needs to be said, but saying what needs to be said with tenderness and honesty. And one way that I think is really important for our viewers to keep in mind to accomplish that is whenever there's feedback that's going to be offered, it is psychologically wisest to start by authentically blessing what's working well and explaining why what's working well matters, and then shifting to even better ifs. What could be even better, rather than framing it in terms of criticisms, and explaining why those even better ifs will boost the owner's feelings of success and their ability to achieve their financial goals. If we really make that clear, if we tie things back into the owner's emotional self-interest, they're going to remain much more open than if they feel like they are being criticized as the parent and their child is being criticized as a child.
Those are some great points. I appreciate that. And as you think about that, you touched on some great points that I'd like to dig into a little bit further. Specifically, the it's not just an emotional journey, but there's real financial need with perception of value. And one of the things that can happen is if the gap between their financial expectations and the market realities is too far, they can start to feel hopeless. And so the next conversation will always translate to, okay, there's this gap between your expectations or your needs and reality. How do we bridge that gap? And when you're having those conversations, what is the psychology and what is the guidance that you can give all of our guests here around making sure that we're filling them with realistic hope, strong expectations, and helping them cross that bridge?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that what you've put into words is perfect, because what we need to fill them with is realistic hope. And depending on the amount of Peter Principle guilt that an owner is carrying, if that level of guilt is pretty high, then we're going to need to do a little bit of hand holding in terms of the tenderness with which we give them the input. And we're going to need to make sure that the way that we offer the difficult information that we know they need to hear is delivered to them with compassion and with regularly blessing them for what they are doing well, and what they are building, and and to frame things in terms of us wanting to support them in essentially fully actualizing the child so that the child grows up to be really successful in the world and prosperous and grows up to be the kind of child that the parent is authentically proud of. I'm not saying that we need to use that kind of wording. Oftentimes that wording is going to feel silly to a business owner, but if we hold that frame of mind inside us as we're speaking to the business owner, we're going to go a long way toward mitigating the tenderness and the guilt and um, the awkwardness that they may feel about getting the feedback that we need to give them.
That's fantastic. And I really like this parent-child analogy, and taking it one step further, putting all of our professional trusted advisor pool in there as the educators, the mentors, the nannies, and the teachers. Clearly it becomes, the analogy makes it very relevant that you want to start educating that child as early in life as possible, and not waiting until you have a Billy Madison event. I do see in all of this a really strong likening and wake up call to trusted advisors that we have a responsibility to our clients to be embarking on this journey early and maintaining the process, growing alongside of the business owner and the business. But if we fast forward to kind of the end, at some point that parent is going to have to let go of the child, and they're going to move off to college. And now I'd like to shift gears a little bit and start talking about when this change, when the change of control, and the owner, the founder, the parent is looking at moving on and transferring that business into its own future. There are a lot of psychological things at play there, right? You've got the business owner psychology. You've got the psychology of the team who's been a part of this process forever and feel like family, and you've got now a new chaperone or guide for the next stage of the business. So if you could just take some time and talk us through all of those dynamic psychologies and how trusted advisors can support all of those stakeholding elements.
Right. Yeah. Well, first of all, well said. I really like what you were amplifying in your comments there, Jason. And so you've touched on some of those factors already, the psychological factors that really need to be addressed in order to effectively fill the gaps that an advisor is aware that need to be filled in order for the business to be sold for an amount of money that the owner would like to get for the business, to at least as close to that number as is actually feasible given how the business is functioning. So one of those areas is leader effectiveness, the owner's own effectiveness. There are virtually inevitably, and this is back to the Peter Principle again, there are almost inevitably in a business owner gaps between who they currently are and who they need to become in order to sell the business for the amount of money that they want to sell it for. And so those gaps, those owner development gaps, need to be identified and filled. Same thing with the owner's leader team. That leader team needs to be strengthened in terms of their effectiveness, because frankly, the stronger the rest of the leader team is, the more likely it's going to be that the right buyer is going to want to keep that leader team intact when they acquire the business, because of how impressed they're going to be by how effective and collaborative that leader team is. And so it's important for owners to, when they're ready to tell their leader team that they're moving toward selling the business, that they're going to be working to elevate their effectiveness as a leader team in order to make sure that the chances are greatest that they're all going to stay intact as a leader team after the sale. The third area is employee engagement. You know, employees are always fearful that when a business gets sold, that might mean that they're going to get canned, they're going to get laid off, they're going to get fired. And the more engaged the employees are in their work, the more productive they're going to be, and the more effectively they're going to collaborate, and the more accountable they will be. When you've got high levels of employee engagement and high levels of collaborative productivity among all of the personnel, you make it virtually impossible for a responsible new owner to want to monkey with the dials. Whereas if the culture is seen as weak, then it's an engraved invitation to a new owner to start making changes that might not actually be in the best interest of the business. So enhancing employee engagement, leader team effectiveness, and collaboration, productivity, if you will, not only helps improve the bottom line of the business, which when you're increasing a business's value and EBITDA, you're increasing the amount of money it can be sold for. It also makes the business seem more turnkey for a buyer to purchase, so it's more appealing in that way. And it also helps the team feel like the new owner would be less likely to want to replace them.
That's fantastic. And, you know, I mean, I think that throughout all of these conversations, the 500-pound gorilla in the room is always going to be fear. And you know, if you could just take a couple seconds to address fear and how, you know, we can take control and overcome fear, or let it take control and overcome the process.
Oh, I'm afraid to deal with that.
I'm gonna
So,
hide under the table while you talk.
yeah, I know, right? The first thing to remember about fear is that fear is a perfectly human emotion. And fear comes in a number of different varieties. The cleanest, most psychologically useful form of fear is pure fear. And pure fear simply says, pay attention. There's something here for us to pay attention to. And that's good fear. That's useful fear. When fear starts becoming counterproductive, it's when we start feeding the fear, indulging the fear, growing the fear with our worst case scenario fantasies, and treating those worst case fantasies as though they're real. What they really are is, at best, they're wake-up calls, they're warning signs about what we need to address. And so the best possible response to fear is, number one, stay awake about it. Fear, I hate to sound like Mr. Rogers, but fear is your friend. And fear is your friend at the level of issuing wake-up calls that there's something to pay attention to. But don't get lost in the fear. Treat it as a wake-up call, and then look at what needs to be addressed in order for what we fear to have the lowest chances of ever coming to pass.
Yeah, and I feel like as a team of trusted advisors, it's incumbent upon us to maintain perspective and grounding, and help the stakeholders who are intimately in the midst of that fear event find a frame of reference, find some firm footing, and find some grounding in a reality that isn't feeding that fear.
Yes, indeed. And just to piggyback on this a little bit further, one of our attendees added, ask what kind of fear, which is exactly right. If we're treating fear as a wake-up call, then we need to be able to look at, uh, boldly, really, as a leader team, look at what is underneath the fear. Is it about safety, trust, certainty, need for reassurance, lack of stability? Those are some of the areas that our attendee Bill had illuminated, and he's spot on about that. We don't just want to say, okay, so there's fear here. Now let's try to fix it. Uh, you know, um, Treatment without diagnosis is malpractice. If fear is alive, then we need to identify what's at the root of that fear so that we address the right thing.
Absolutely. First, you have to pay attention, and then you have to know what you're looking at.
Mhm.
So let's put ourselves a little bit further down the road now. Assume we've made a transaction, and now a new owner or ownership team is stepping into the business, and that that likely means a change in culture. It frequently means a change in expectations from a lifestyle. There's a lot of change going on, right? So how does that impact these psychological issues, and how does the psychology of all the stakeholders shift after a transaction has been consummated?
Well, first of all, the the preparation that needs to happen is around a couple of factors that I think are important to at least briefly illuminate. One is that owners that really care about their business, which is most owners in my experience, and I think your experience, they want their mission, their brand, their culture to continue after the sale, and they want their personnel to not be canned. They want their personnel to stay on board, to continue to be part of this business family that the owner has birthed with the help of those folks. And so, of course, personnel start worrying about whether they'll indeed be canned, and the owner starts worrying about who they will be, their identity, and what they'll do, what their purpose and mission and next chapter is after the sale. And that one little slice of that also includes wondering about what role they might still want to play in the company after the sale and for how long. And when these kinds of worries on the part of the owners and the personnel are not addressed, these worries can and often do sabotage the selling process, most often unconsciously. But when you have an owner who is worried about will this baby that they've birthed get fed or dismantled after the sale, they're going to unconsciously sabotage the sales process, even when they want the business sold. Uh, Personnel might unconsciously sabotage the process if they are not feeling essentially indispensable to the business. And then the owner is also going to sabotage the transaction if they have not fully worked out in themselves what they're going to do after the sale of the business, what their next chapter is going to look like. So those are not optional; those are absolutely mandatory things to consider and address as part of preparing for the sale. And then I think you're going to want to go into next, which is after the business is sold. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So after the business is sold, the seller usually needs mentoring support in getting through their um, guilt or fear around their own future. They're grieving their identity loss, their loss of identity, their grief at the death of something that they have been centrally involved in, and mentoring support through that next chapter rebuilding process. The buyer usually needs mentoring or facilitation to onboard into the company that they have acquired with the personnel in the company in ways that bond the personnel with the new buyer, and mentoring to help the new buyer effectively, honestly, and usefully reassure the personnel and build collaboration with them. And frankly, that growth edge for a buyer is also a Peter Principle issue, oftentimes, because the necessities of integrating into an existing company oftentimes take a buyer beyond their highest level of incompetence, or stretch them into having to grow in new areas that take them beyond their existing leadership and culture creation skills. So buyers need mentoring and facilitation. And in a merger, of course, you also have the added challenge of blending a culture, which would be analogous to blending a family when you have two divorced people with children who have gotten married, and now they're blending a whole new family. So in a merger, you have leadership teams and cultures that usually need facilitating in that integration process.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate all of this. One of the things that I think is worth just touching on is, clear, like this information is novel and important enough to invite all of our guests to attend this conversation about it. And when you think just contextually, you think there's this whole industry of M&A transaction advisory services that facilitates all elements of a transaction. So talk me through how this industry addresses psychological issues and sets transactions in such a way that both sides can be successful before, during, and after a change of control.
Well, the industry doesn't, first of all. At best, in general, in the M&A transaction world, there's lip service given to many of these factors, or some of these factors, perhaps on rare occasions, all of these factors. They get acknowledged, um, but almost as an afterthought, or as a nuisance, or as with this sense of it's just part of the transaction, and gut it out, grin and bear it, get over yourself, and what our mission is to get the transaction completed, and we'll deal with stuff later on. And I think that's really a setup for sellers to have seller's remorse. It is a setup for buyers to feel like they ended up jumping into a pond that wasn't as juicy as they hoped it would be. And it's a setup for the culture of the business to run fear levels that are so high that good things get undermined in the post transaction process. And so I think what's really typical is that M&A firms rarely do anything to help sellers, buyers, and cultures with these issues, even when some of these issues are acknowledged. And there's a really good reason for that, which is that very few, if any, other than Blue Sky is the only one that I know that does have this. Very few M&A transaction firms, if any, actually have an M&A success psychologist, a psychological business strategist on their team to walk through the entire process of preparing to be sold, the selling transaction process, and the post-transaction process, so that those psychological factors that everyone who's experienced in the M&A world knows are in play actually get dealt with in good ways.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for we're pushing right up against the end of the half hour, so I'd like to again thank all the attendees, thank everyone that made comments throughout the conversation. But before we go, if any of the guests and attendees found this interesting, what would you advise them? How do they take this information and start making use of it?
Right. Well, maybe we can throw the page on the. There we go. So you'll see now in the screen share that the Blue Sky page is there, and if you go to that page, you're going to see a link for having a consultation, getting a consultation set up, and I would strongly recommend that whether you're a business advisor or whether you're a business owner, or whether you're looking to acquire a business, that you set up a consultation with Blue Sky Business Resources so that you can find out whether the full range of business resources that Blue Sky provides, that's far more full range than a typical M&A transaction firm provides, is a right match for you. And if so, what is going to be needed in order for you to walk through the M&A process in a really productive, effective way.
That's fantastic. And the only thing that I would like to add to that is if you're an advisor to business owners, we'd love to chat with you also about how we can help you add value and strengthen your clients' businesses. So with that said, again, thank you all so very much for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did. This was probably the fastest 30 minutes of my week. And we hope to see you on the next panel and talk to you in between.
Well, do we want to find out if there are any questions that people want to ask at this point?
Absolutely. If anyone wants to jump on the chat and ask any questions, please feel free.
Yeah, please type in your questions at this point in the chat box. Stefan says, great info, appreciate the focus on the owner's inner child and the application of blessing, tenderness, and honesty. And yeah, it is. It can't be overestimated, the importance of that. And just to amplify that once again, tenderness and honesty go together. In other words, if all there is tenderness but not honesty, then you get indulgence. Then people are shielded from information they need to have. If all you have is honesty without tenderness, then people feel raped and pillaged psychologically. It's got to be both and.
Absolutely.
Well, it seems as though people are satisfied with what they've heard. I'm not. Oh, here's a comment. Do you have any notes or written outline on this excellent presentation that you could email to me? Well, the replay of this is going to be available. So, and you're all going to get an email with the link to the replay. So that is going to be available. I'm not sure what else we might do in response to that. Jason, do you have any thoughts?
We at this point we don't have any transcript or outline, but that's something that we as a team will look into, and we'll definitely get some sort of structure around this information onto our blog section and the website. But please feel free to keep an eye out for the link, and you can always rewatch the webinar. And we're always able to discuss these concepts and more with you at any time.
Absolutely, and thank you for that comment, Preston. And thank you for the thank yous as well. And I'm glad that this clarity is useful, especially what Bill is saying is that what's useful is especially is how the owner's identity is tied to a business like caring for a child. Yeah, very much. Good. Well, I think that covers the comments and questions that everyone has posted.
All right. Well, thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Yes, please, all of you do that. And we really look forward to you being in touch with Blue Sky.